This is Weekend Calling with Claire Kerr on N Live Radio. I'm delighted to welcome Jackie Lees and KG Miles along to our Bob Dylan special this evening. They are the authors of new book, Bob Dylan in London, Troubadour Tales. Welcome, Jackie and Keith.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you very much, Claire.
Well, firstly, may I say congratulations on your book. It's a really interesting and insightful read. A Dylan pilgrimage through London, really, isn't it? And that was what gave you the concept. Jackie, tell us about that.
It's exactly what gave us the concept. When we decided in 2016 to go and visit the locations that had an association with Dylan, we called it a pilgrimage. And we sat down afterwards, and it was Keith's idea because I wouldn't have been so brave. And he just said, why don't we write a book about Dylan and London? And it went through various incarnations. You know, at first it was going to be a bit longer and maybe with photographs. And then gradually over time, it turned into a guidebook. The one thing that never changed was that we wanted a map in it from square one. There had to be a map, and it wanted to be in the so that people could really use it.
Absolutely. Well, that's brilliant. And they can't they now? And there's some really detailed and specific stories from right back in the 60s and 70s, also including like the history of the buildings and the changing owners and the changing of the buildings, as well as these specifics of Dylan's appearances. And, you know, and that's quite exciting, isn't it? And I just wonder how you even began to go about researching and gathering these stories together. Perhaps, Keith, you want to tell me about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the other thing I would say, Jackie would say, nothing. We always intended there to be a map in the book, to be a guide. The other thing we always intended was it to be fun, because there are a lot of books about Bob Dylan. There are a lot of music books. I don't think there are very many that have the kind of fun and passion that I think Jackie and I have put into this book. It was the proverbial labour of love. And we're both very, very crazy Dylan fans, but also lovers of London. And as you say, we wanted to give the background to the actual locations. There are some of the lesser known locations, the small pubs and clubs that he played in the very early 60s when he came here first in 62.
Yeah.
But also places like the Royal Albert Hall, which is a wonderful place that everyone knows. Yep. Not everyone knows the history and the background.
No, that's something I didn't know. It's really interesting that he started off as a folk singer, didn't he? Sort of doing that folk club circuit and getting connections, forging these connections with well-known folk singers at the time, Martin Carthy, some others. And that seemed to me to be the inspiration for him to develop as an artist from this sort of folk singer through to this kind of famous rock star, I suppose.
Yes, well, in 62, when he came over, when he first arrived, the BBC invited him over for a play. And when he first arrived, he was just out of his teens, really. He had some success in Greenwich Village, but not really major success. And he's had one album out, which wasn't his own songs, and that hadn't sold well. So he arrived here in a very lively folk music scene in London at that time. And he thrived. He took to the scene. He was a very confident individual. But people like Martin Carthy befriended him. Dylan learnt a lot of the melodies here and really absorbed. He's a great music magpie. He absorbed the music that was here. And it really set him up to go back and take on the world.
Wow. What really interested me as well in the book was that John Lennon used to hang out with Dylan, when he was becoming more well known, and Lennon really respected his songs, and not just because of what Dylan sang about, but how he sang about it. And do you think it's that magic that makes him so successful as an artist?
When you say that magic, what do you mean, Claire?
About the way that it's not just what he sings about, but it's the way that he does it.
Well, I think it's also the content, his lyrics, the poet, the lyric, the literary level on which he was writing in particular, that John Lennon was so attracted by. I mean, when the Beatles first heard Freewheeling Bob Dylan, his second album, they basically said they just played it over, they wore it out, they just couldn't get enough. It was a very
That's pretty amazing, actually, isn't it?
It is absolutely amazing. Then Dylan met them for the first time in 1964 in New York, and then when he was getting more famous, they came to see him at the Albert Hall in 65 and 66, and there was a kind of a real competitive friendship between Bob Dylan and John Lennon. But Dylan's closest connection came to be with George Harrison. Over the years, they were both in the Travelling Wilburys, which was George Harrison's concept to set that up, that super group in the 80s. I think that there's a very healthy rivalry that went on there, and
so it's through those sort of messages and the poetics in the songwriting.
Well, to a large extent, I think they followed in Dylan's slipstream. I mean, you got to remember that in 64, Bob Dylan was writing sort of classic protest songs, if you like, and some of the great serious, Hard Rain's Gonna Fall and songs that have huge poetic and literary sense to them. And the Dylans Dylan would go down that particular path. At that time, the Beatles were still singing "She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah." And, this changed them. They thought, this is where we want to go. And John Lennon was a competitor to Dylan, and in spurring each other on, really.
Oh, healthy though.
It was good for the both. I mean,
that mutual respect, probably.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And that was a huge time. There is a chapter in the book about the Savoy Hotel, and when Dylan was over here in 65, and he was holding court, really. The Beatles were here, other artists came to pay their respects. They knew that Dylan was going in this direction, and they wanted to follow that.
But Dylan as well, the first time that he heard the Beatles on the radio, he just said he was blown away too. He said something like it was absolutely outrageous, the chords they were playing and the harmonies made it all valid. And I think, he obviously went from being a solo artist eventually to wanting to record with a backing band, with a band. And I do always think, he must have heard the Beatles.
So it came.
He envied them, the camaraderie that they had. Whereas he was just out there, like the cover of our book is just him at the Royal Albert Hall in 65, this solitary figure all alone on the stage with just his guitar and his harmonica.
So when he did have his band, it wasn't so well received, was it, initially?
You could say that, yes, indeed. That's the going electric period, which again, Dylan, he was bored. He had said it, even by 65, he was bored. He knew how the audience was going to react before he'd even sung the song. And he wanted something different. He wanted a change. He wanted to move away. He certainly wanted to break away from the protest song, the voice of a generation, the conscience of a generation, all these labels that people were trying to load up on him. He's always loved bands. Ironically, of course, you could say his initial inception was not as a solo folk singer, but he was influenced by Buddy Holly, by Little Richard. He was playing rock and roll when he was in his teens at his high school. So perhaps he always craved going back to that.
Perhaps. Well, we must talk about Subterranean Homesick Blues, because most people would think had been filmed in New York, but no, that's not the case then, is it? Keith, tell us about that.
No, as you say, most people throughout the years have looked at that. It was, 1965. It's the first real music video, and people look at that iconic video with Dylan in the alleyway with the placards, and they've always thought of New York. But no, it was filmed at the back of the Savoy Hotel. and we are delighted that we can make that better known. We'd like eventually to have queues of tourists at the Savoy Steps with their placards.
That could happen, I think.
Oh, we would love that. We would love that. Jackie and I looked at getting a blue plaque up there, but unfortunately one side of that alleyway is the Savoy Hotel and you can't put anything on their walls. And the other side is the chapel that's owned by the Queen. And she's not going to put...
She might not allow that.
But
the Queen probably is a Dylan fan.
We'd love to think so. We'd love to think so. I'm sure Prince Charles has played Dylan songs too.
Blowing in the wind.
And weren't those captions, the cue cards, written on the sort of laundry card that goes in the back of the Savoy Hotel?
Shirt. Yes, when they fold the shirt around it just the right size, and all then written in the Savoy by Dylan, by Donovan and Joan Baez and whoever else they could get their hands on. I think Donovan in his autobiography makes a point of saying that his placards were particularly admired by Dylan for their artistry. Donovan was never one to hide his light, as it were.
I mean, if you had one of those placards now, you could retire on the proceeds on eBay, I'm sure. But unfortunately, all destroyed, one assumes.
Oh, you never know. Maybe there's one out there to be had. Keep searching.
We never found that out, did we?
Oh, well, you never know. It might come to light now with the book and everything.
How on earth would you verify it, though?
How would you prove it?
Well, that's the thing. You'd have to get in touch with Bob himself.
Or Donovan. Get Donovan phoning in.
What do you have a favourite story in the book? I'll ask you first, Jackie. Or just a little tease. Obviously, we don't want to give too much away, but maybe there's just like a little gem of, a story that you loved researching.
Well, my favourite story, and it's a lot of people's favourite story, and sorry, Keith, if I'm going to steal yours, is where Bob Dylan was trying to track down Dave Stewart in Crouch End, and through a few miscommunications, ended up at the house and knocked on a door to be opened by a woman whose husband just happened to be Dave. So when he said, "Is Dave in?" she said, "Oh no, he's at work, but would you like to come in?" And that's just a great fun story for me. Yeah. There's so many stories.
There's so many. That's really funny. Yeah, she just sat there, made him a cup of tea. Then you can imagine, can't you? Just waiting for her husband to come back. What about you, Keith?
Well, that is a fantastic story. Unfortunately, we've got such wonderful stories through the 60s, but I'm going to pick another one from that particular chapter in 93. And that is, we have a foreword by a wonderful writer called Andy Muir, who wrote the book Dylan and Shakespeare. And it was really, he puts across the time when Bob Dylan was doing that walkabout in Camden High Street, and people were just watching him going up and down filming this video with Dave Stewart. And Andy Muir got a call from his friend who said, "Bob Dylan's in Camden High Street. Can you come up?" And Andy then eventually gave him his fanzine. But he was every Bob Dylan fan in that time. Just so in awe of this particular individual who is such a huge colossus of the music scene. And it's wonderful, wonderful.
Ah, that's a great story. Thank you. So what is it then, do you think, if you could sum it up, what makes Dylan one of the most important songwriters sort of the 20th century?
Well, I think that one of the sparks that we talk about in there is Dylan meeting Robert Graves. And, Robert Graves, who is a huge literary figure, Dylan has been a greater poet and a literary part of popular music. But I think the enduring nature of Dylan is largely because he's a great music magpie. He brings the music world together from all aspects. And, he's in his 80th birthday year, he's still producing music. He's still producing so much variety of music.
Incredible.
And he recently sold his back catalogue. So many songs. Goodness.
What do you think about that? Did you think that was a good plan?
Yeah, I'm an old boy. If you're gonna financially look after the family by selling your music, then do it, I say.
And it's already out there, isn't it? So
exactly. It's not,
Yeah.
he's not losing any real control. It's out there.
No, good financial plan that. Let's talk about the Dylan Room at the Troubadour Club.
Yes, it's a splendid thing.
Yes, that was really. Sorry, I think we've got a bit of lagging going on.
There is,
here.
Isn't there? Yeah.
Who would you like to talk?
Yeah, I'll talk through.
Who would you like to
Dylan Room? Yeah, it's wonderful. We went on this wonderful pilgrimage around the various locations, and one we came to was the Troubadour, which is in Earl's Court, which was a folk club, and still was until recently a folk club, and he's in mothballs at the moment until we can go to live music again.
Yeah.
But Jackie and I knew that Dylan had played there in 1962, and Jimi Hendrix had started there, and Paul Simon had started there. And it's a wonderful music venue that is really living history. And we went there and we expected things on the wall, and there was nothing. There was nothing of Dylan. So we asked the owners if we could put a picture up, and they kindly donated an entire room for us, which we've put out with all posters and pictures and information about Dylan's time in London. And we're blessed that we co-curate that. We don't do a lot there. We just put the stuff up and we leave it. Dylan fans come from all over to see it, and to actually see a place where Dylan played.
Isn't that great then? Oh, well, good for you getting all of that together, and your passion's really coming through then. They must have been delighted with you for doing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, they realise they're sitting on music history. And I think one of the things we wanted to do in the book was make people aware that London music history does need to be part of the tourist trail. People should go to the Troubadour and not Oxford Street in my book. But there you go.
Well, it certainly made me want to go and journey around. So I think it's a fantastic read. Now, tell us how we get a copy then.
All the usual places, Claire. We're really pleased to see that lots of small local bookshops are able to provide it. I'm always going to say go to your local bookshop over any other option if you can, but also Amazon, of course, have it in there, and they're a bit cheaper if you want to buy it on Amazon.
And you'll get it the next day.
People are on a budget and they can't wait. Unfortunately, Amazon is the quickest and cheapest route.
And there's an ebook as well that I presume is only through Amazon, although I'm actually not that familiar with how that works, the whole ebook market, but definitely through Amazon you can get hold of the ebook as well.
You must be so thrilled that this idea has actually come to fruition, and there it is, a great read to share with everyone, to share your passion for Dylan. It must be a wonderful feeling.
Well, we were delighted. We're first-time authors, and when it came out on Thursday, as Jackie will tell you, her daughter in the middle of the night came and told her that we were #1 in Amazon in folk music, and we'd beaten Tom Jones to the top of the chart.
Wow! Congratulations! That's amazing.
That's what we said.
We had a good week as first-time authors, I have to say.
Wow, that is wonderful.
I think you're also #1 also in ebooks for country music, to do with country music as well.
Yeah. Well, we've taken, we've done well. We thought it would be friends and family, but there are a lot of music fans out there that I think appreciate our passion and the fun we've put into it, really, I think.
Well, congratulations, both of you, on the book. It's a fantastic read, and you deserve to do well with that. Jackie Lees and KG Miles, authors of Bob Dylan in London, Troubadour Tales. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Claire.